In 1922, horror cinema changed forever with the release of one of the first vampire films in history. A work steeped in gothic atmosphere and disturbing psychology that, for its time, was as disturbing as it was revolutionary. Today, we talk about NOSFERATU, the film that marked a turning point in horror cinema. NOSFERATU, Eine Symphonie des Grauens, or in English, NOSFERATU, A Symphony of Horror, is a German film released in 1922 and directed by Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau. It is one of the first horror films in history and at the same time one of the most influential in popular culture. Shot in black and white and belonging to the silent film era, this work not only defined many of the visual codes of horror, but is also considered a gem of German expressionism, an artistic movement that sought to represent emotions and mental states through distorted images, extreme lighting, and disturbing atmospheres. It was produced by the Brana Film Company, which unfortunately went bankrupt shortly after its release, leaving NOSFERATU as its only production. Its visual audacity and macabre narrative made it a film ahead of its time, whose impact is still felt more than a century later. NOSFERATU began as an unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, published in 1897. Because the production company wasn't able to obtain the rights to the work, Murnau decided to change the names and some details. Dracula became Count Orlok, Jonathan Harker was renamed Hutter, and Mina was renamed Ellen. Despite these superficial changes, the story was clearly the same. Bram Stoker's widow, Florence Stoker, sued the creators for plagiarism and won the case. As a result, the court ordered all the copies of the film to be destroyed. However, some copies survived in private collections and international copies that had escaped the legal order. Thanks to these clandestine copies, NOSFERATU managed to survive to this day, becoming a cult classic that was literally on the verge of disappearing forever. If you subscribe to my channel, you will help my videos not to disappear forever. You can also help me a lot by hitting the like button. Unlike many expressionist films which were shot entirely on painted studio sets, NOSFERATU combined these techniques with filming on real outdoor locations. Murnau filmed in authentic castles and villages, giving the film a disturbing realism that heightened its oppressive atmosphere. The design of Count Orlok, played by actor Max Schreck, is one of the most memorable elements. His bald head, pointed ears, extremely long nails, and fixed gaze created a disturbing and grotesque figure far removed from the aristocratic and seductive image that would later be popularized by versions of Dracula. His mere appearance on screen generated an almost supernatural sense of menace, reinforced by the use of extreme light and shadow, key elements of expressionist cinema. The story follows Thomas Hutter, a young man who travels to Transylvania to close a deal with the mysterious Count Orlok. Upon arriving at the castle, Hutter begins to notice disturbing details about his host, his cadaverous appearance, his strange way of moving, and the gloomy atmosphere that surrounds him. He soon discovers that Orlok is in fact a vampire. Obsessed with Ellen, Hutter's wife, Orlok travels to the port city where the couple lives, bringing with him a plague of rats that spreads panic among the inhabitants. Finally, Ellen realizes that the only way to stop the vampire is to sacrifice herself. She offers herself to him and distracts him until dawn. when sunlight destroys him. This final scene is crucial, as it was one of the first time that the sun was depicted as lethal to vampires, a concept that would later become established in popular imagination. In addition to Dracula's influence, the film draws on elements of Eastern European folklore. In Romanian and Balkan tradition, vampires were not seductive aristocrats like Dracula, but monstrous, sickly creatures, more like animated corpses that infested villages and spread disease. Orlok's appearance, bald head, long nails, rat-like features, fits better with this folkloric vision. The term Nosferatu came precisely from these legends. The word appears in 19th century writings on Romanian superstitions, but linguists believe it was a mistranslation or a deformation of terms such as NOSFERATU, the unbearable, or Nesuferito, linked to the concept of evil spirit. Bram Stoker popularized the word by including it in Dracula, and Murnau adopted it as the title for his film. A distinctive feature of Nosferatu is that the vampire arrives on a ship full of rats, bringing with him a deadly plague that decimates the city. This idea is not found in Dracula and seems to be inspired by the outbreaks of medieval bubonic plague, in which rats were a symbol of death and decay. Murnau used this to connect the vampire with the figure of disease. Orlok not only kills by drinking blood, but his very presence brings pestilence, reinforcing the idea that he is a force of destruction looming over society. If you are developing an illness because of my art, you can visit my store and purchase any of my prints. I leave the direct link in the pinned comment. Germany in the 1920s was fascinated by the occult, astrology, and mysticism. The production company Prana Film, which created Nosferatu, was founded explicitly to make occult films. This explains symbolic details in the film, such as Ellen's voluntary sacrifice has overtones of a purification ritual. The relationship between the vampire and the plague reflects collective fears after World War I and the Spanish flu, associating Orlok with the social fear of mass death, and the title itself, Symphony of Horror, that suggests an almost spiritual experience rather than a simple monster story. Germany in the 1920s was plunged into the chaos of the Weimar Republic. Rampant inflation, unemployment, hunger, and a population traumatized by war. Against this backdrop, expressionist cinema served as a visual and emotional catharsis, bringing society's nightmares to the screen. Nosferatu reflected that sense of decadence and fatalism. The vampire cannot be defeated by force or weapons, only by sacrifice and sunlight. This message of powerlessness resonated at a time when the people felt that Germany's fate was beyond their control. In addition, the film also touches on a deep psychological fear, invisible contagion, whether biological or social. The vampire not only kills but corrupts. His mere presence ruins entire cities. In a society marked by the recent plague and the devastation of war, this made Nosferatu a visual metaphor for the fear of silent annihilation. According to Freud, the uncanny, das Unheimliche, is the familiar made strange. Orlok embodies this idea, human in form, but stripped of all warmth, a disturbing reminder of the death that awaits us. Ellen only defeats the monster by giving in to her fatal attraction to him, an echo of the repressed sexual tension of the Victorian and post-Victorian eras. The vampire symbolizes forbidden desire that threatens the social order. From Jung's perspective, Orlok can be seen as the shadow, that dark side of humanity that we repress, but which ends up emerging in times of crisis, violence, hunger, and mass death after the war. Upon its release, Nosferatu was not an immediate commercial success, but it left a lasting aesthetic and psychological mark. It embodied the feelings of loss, decay, and fear of an entire generation. It was not just a horror story, but a visual reflection of the emotional and social decay of Weimar Germany. This symbolic weight made Nosferatu transcend mere entertainment. It showed that horror could be more than monsters. It could be a vehicle for exploring the collective unconscious and historical traumas. This approach profoundly influenced later horror cinema, which began to use monsters as metaphors for real anxieties. One of the most striking aspects of Nosferatu is the origin of the term itself. The word Nosferatu was taken from a mistranslation in text on Romanian folklore, and although it was used as a synonym for vampire, its original meaning is actually unclear and uncertain. Another curiosity that fueled the myth of the film is the figure of actor Max Schreck. His performance was so convincing that urban legends arose claiming that Schreck was a real vampire. Decades later, this idea would inspire the film Shadow of the Vampire in the year 2000, which fantasized about the possibility that Murnau had hired a real undead for his film. In addition, the film was lost or incomplete for several decades, but it was rediscovered and restored in the 1960s, allowing new generations to appreciate its artistic value and disturbing atmosphere. Nosferatu was the first work in which the sun destroys the vampire. Previously, in folklore and in Dracula, daylight only weakened the vampire, but did not kill him. This small change, created by Murnau, became a universal rule of the genre, demonstrating the direct impact this film had on the modern construction of the vampire myth. Nosferatu not only inaugurated vampire cinema as we know it, but also profoundly influenced the entire aesthetic of the horror genre. Its shadow extends to films such as 1931 Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi, and later to modern works that draw on its gothic aesthetic and unsettling atmosphere. In 1979, director Werner Herzog made a remake titled Nosferatu, the Vampire, which sought to pay homage to the original. Today, director Robert Eggers has released a new version of the story starring Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok and Willem Dafoe in what is a modern reinterpretation of this immortal classic. More than a century after its release, Nosferatu remains one of the most influential films in cinema history, a living testament to how horror, art, and technical innovation can converge in a work that defies the passage of time. Nosferatu is not just a horror film, it is the shadow of a wounded era, the echo of ancestral fears that still accompany us. More than a vampire, Orlok is the face of everything we fear: death, plague, and the unknown that stares at us from the darkness.